Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Elhamdülillah Rabbil alemin. Ve salatu ve selamu ala Resulina Muhammedin ve ala alihi ve sahibi ecmain. Allahümme zidna ilmen ve elhikna bis salihin. Selamun aleyküm ve rahmetullahi ve berekatuhu. I would like to welcome all of you to Istanbul. I'm very glad to see you here. Only one difference that we just have another heat wave. The whole world probably is having. Just last week it was very nice, comfortable weather, but it's changing constantly. So it is. The microphone is on. Yeah. I have to bring it closer. That's all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Don't worry. As I go on, my sound will increase gradually. My voice will increase, so don't worry. Inshallah. So today, in the first hour, we will discuss a very brief history of science in Islamic civilization, putting more emphasis on Islamic scientific tradition. That is what really we need. I know you might say, what does this have to do with education? You know, why do we need history of science? Why do we need to know about scientific tradition? The reason is the whole educational system. If we, want to have an approach that reflects the perspective of our civilization or Islam in general, then we need to know Islamic scientific tradition, because the educational system is based on that tradition actually. Primarily, of course, education has certain purposes. One of them is science, scholarship, and so on. So this is, the students are able to attain this ability if they learn the main characteristic of the tradition, which is reflected in the educational system, reflected in the attitude of the teachers, and reflected, of course, in the textbooks and the whole curriculum. So that is why we thought we would try to explain this briefly today. Now, the scientific tradition basically performs the same function in every civilization. It's important not only in Islamic civilization, but in every other civilization. I would like to give you just one example. In a society, whatever we do, we usually do it or perform it according to certain principles, rules, regulations, values, all of which make up a tradition concerning that action. For instance, when somebody is going to get married, the marriage itself, the whole ceremony, nikah, all those things are performed according to a certain rules, regulations, all of which we call a tradition. So this is our, wedding tradition or marriage tradition, whatever you may call. In the same way, the teaching of sciences, doing scientific activities, all of these are done according to certain traditions. When we grow up in a society, if we don't question these things, we are not aware of them. We don't say, okay, now let me see first, I would like to learn what this tradition is, and then I will perform like that. It doesn't work that way. As we grow up or as we get our education, gradually we learn and then we develop it ourselves. and therefore, it leaves impression in our mind, in our feelings, and so on. So when we perform them, they are manifested in our actions and behaviors. So it is as if, natural works like that. Of course, scholarly studies is not like that. We need to question it. What is it, how did it develop, what are its main characteristics, and so on. This is extremely important. And you probably know already that the discipline that studies this is now sociology of science. So for this reason, it is very important, for the educational system and for the teaching and so on. Of course, specifically when we bring the issue to Islamic scientific tradition, definitely that becomes even the most significant one, as I will try to explain, inshallah. So before we continue, let's raise our first question: what is a tradition, if it is that important? As you know, a tradition emerges after a long process within a social context as a result of our social and epistemological nature. As such, it has certain characteristics. Now, this means, this is just a brief description, of course. There cannot be a tradition without a society. So an individual, even 2-3 individuals, one single family, if they live isolated from a society, they won't be able to establish a tradition. Why? Because if we look at these characteristics, we can understand much better. I primarily, when we examine the process through which a tradition emerges, then we can see that it has primarily 5 characteristics, 5 basic characteristics. Number 1, we already identified social context, meaning society. Without society, it cannot have. And number 2, a long process. When I say long process, it may take centuries, to develop this tradition. At the beginning, it is, we can just call it custom. A custom is not tradition. It's just simple action or rules that we develop concerning our certain actions. So that means a tradition is a collection of customs at the same time. So this requires a long process. For Islamic scientific tradition, I will give example, how long that process took place in Islamic civilization. But besides this, throughout, because it takes a long process, even for centuries, there should be a continuity. Otherwise, constantly you change your customs, no matter how much you collect them, it will not constitute a tradition. It won't make up a tradition. So continuity is important, that it should be continuous, that action, that is regularity in those actions should be continuous. And then number 4, I call this mental accumulation. Most sociologists, as far as I know, don't refer to this. I call this doctrinal aspect of a tradition. That means that, when people, individuals, live within certain practices in a society, no matter how long it takes place, and it is continuous, concerning that behavior or that action, custom, whatever, if there is no accumulation in his mind that it is done in this way, my forefathers done like this, it is important, if I do it, it will be like so. This whole thing I call doctrinal aspect, mental accumulation in the minds of the individuals. And this mental accumulation is handed down from generation to generation, which also ensures the continuity. Okay? And uniformity of behavior. This is also important, which is very much related to continuity. but a behavior can be continuous but not uniform. So that means if there is, a small, departure from the main action, gradually it will lead to greater departures and change. And as a result, the continuity will not be there. So this uniformity of behavior is also important to ensure the establishment of a tradition in a society. When we have these characteristics, we can give, a definition, but this is sociological definition of a tradition. All customs, mores, attitudes, and rituals, beliefs, which arise through regular performance of certain behaviors of members of a social group that leaves a mental conception of those behaviors attributed collectively to the society, are called tradition. So now we understand what a tradition is. If you want to make it simple, you can just say, conceptual understanding of a specific behavior or behaviors that grows gradually in a society, that is continuous through a long time, having uniformity of behavior, is tradition. This just looking at those five characteristics, you can give this definition very easy. However, I try to say, also refer to what kind of things are collected in a tradition. To express that, that's why I thought customs, mores, attitudes, rituals, beliefs. You see, all these constitute the tradition also. They are all parts of the tradition. They are within the tradition itself. Now, I would like to say, this in philosophy we call this tautology. I say tradition is tradition. It doesn't make any difference whether it is in knowledge activities, scientific activities, whatever. The only thing that changes is its background. So in knowledge activities, all you have to do, because knowledge tradition, has a specific character. Or if you say wedding tradition, again, so you define it according to that specific behavior, whatever it may be. So if we give our example as far as knowledge tradition is concerned, maybe we can repeat the same definition, except this time, instead of including the whole society, we include only the society of the scholars at this stage. Scholars, intellectuals, and so on. So then we say a knowledge tradition is the totality of all customs, mores, attitudes, and rituals, beliefs which arise through a regular performance of certain behaviors of members of a group, or rather a community of scholars. Now, if you say just a group, that means the whole society will be actively involved in this action, which is not possible. Only a group of people are involved here, and those are what we call scholars, or the ulama, or the fuqaha, these terminology as we use in Islamic civilization. So behaviors of members of a community of scholars actively involved in learning activities that leave a mental conception of those behaviors attributed collectively to that community of the learned, not to the whole society. Although this tradition arises in the society, of course it belongs to that society also. But in our definition, we try to refer primarily to the scholars, not the whole society, because those who develop this tradition are scholars, not everyone. I can give some examples. There are things that we need to explain. I'm just giving a loose definition and go on. If we give an example, Islamic science knowledge tradition is established by the Prophet ﷺ. This is very well known. It is very clear. And it is very continuous through time, and it reached our own time even until today. In Muslim societies, this is still felt very much, although may not be practiced very much, or practiced by only a certain group of people, which is not good. because when our Prophet ﷺ, he developed this tradition, he wanted everyone to be active in this knowledge tradition, not only scholars. Although scholars are expertise, they have the expert, they are the people who are expert in this area. They work actively, and because of this, greater reward is given for them. When this reward was mentioned, those people in the community, they felt very bad, because they said, we are not part of this Sufa group and or other scholars that doing this activity, but why they have so much reward for this, and we feel very bad. We can't, we want to have the same. Why not? He said, okay, but you are doing your daily work. Everybody of this is not a scholar, only certain people, and usually, ideally speaking, I mean, these are what I try to develop throughout my studies. Ideally speaking, about 15% of the society should be scholar, ideally speaking. If it's more, much better, of course, but the whole community must be involved in the activity. This is the important thing. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he told them, do you want to get the same reward? They said, yes, of course, because this is very high reward. The highest reward, as you know, is given to the scholars, not to shuhada, because a scholar is much more valuable than a shaheed. This is known by hadith, of course, right? So after the prophets, the scholars, the highest rank. Rutbatul ilm a'la rutab, very clear in the hadith. This has already been identified. But everybody wants to have this. How can we do? He said, okay, then help the scholars. Provide them their needs, whatever they need, financially or socially or any other way. You help them, you get the same reward also. As a result, the whole community was involved in the activity. And it became a knowledge community. And this is very well attested, like if you are able to find the book by Franz Rosenthal. He's an Orientalist. He wrote a book on the concept of knowledge in medieval Islam. The title is Knowledge Triumphant. If you find it, very clearly he says, in the introduction, that Islamic civilization is a knowledge civilization. It's based on knowledge, in other words. So why? It's because the whole community was involved. So when we consider this, we can see that everyone in the community helped develop this knowledge tradition in Islamic civilization. Of course, the main person here is the Prophet ﷺ and the scholars. So although this a bit, we can say like a not very strong, but exception as far as my definition is concerned. So the whole community was involved. That is why the spread of knowledge was extremely high, very high speed. When I present the history of science, you will see, I usually give this, you take the first revelation, 610. We know very clearly Islamic history, history of Islamic civilization is very clear. And you can, from the beginning until today, without any gap, any problem, you can, give the history. The details are not important for us. In detail points, we don't have to know the details. But the general history is important to come up with such analysis, this scholarly analysis. You take the first revelation, we can say this is the beginning of Islamic civilization. 610. There is no doubt about this. Nobody will, say, no, it didn't start at that time. In civilizations also, I'll tell you something, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years is nothing. It's like one day concerning human life. So if you want, you can round it up, say 600. No problem. It's not a big problem. But we take the first revelation, which is very clear and definite. That's why I say 610. So after the 610, when the first science emerged in Islamic civilization, we have history of science, of course, But when we say science, we don't mean physics. We mean every science. The first science that emerged in Islam is fiqh. When did it emerge? And we can say within 50 years, namely 660 or so, very clearly its name, methodology, usul al-fiqh, and so on and everything. You know, what constitutes science, you know, if we consider that, you know, its subject matter, methodology, its theories, and accumulation of knowledge. These four things are the basic characteristics. If they emerge, and if they give a name for it, then it is a science. And the first science emerged in 50 years. Let's take Greek civilization. The first science in Greek civilization that emerged is probably physics. How long did it take? It took about 2,000 years. 50 years in Islam, 2,000 years in Greek civilization. I'll tell you something, let's see if you agree with me or not. You know, sciences that emerged in Western civilization. In Western civilization, I would say no science emerged at all. It's taken primarily from Islamic civilization. All sciences are taken from Islamic civilization, and then they developed after that. When this happened, it happened around the 10th or 11th century. When did the Western civilization begin? Can anybody tell me a date? Like we said, 610.
15th, 16th.
Yeah, that is clearly called Western. But if we consider the main element, you know, Western science, Western civilization is based on Christianity. And they give their date very clear. They say 0, right? The birth of Isa alayhi salam. They take that as the beginning of their history. But they never say their history began at that time, although they identify like that. Most of the books I read, they say Ionia is the cradle of Western civilization. You probably come across this also. I can give you the exact references if you want. Many of them, they say, take the new you know, books that are coming out now in the West. It's becoming very common to write world histories. And all the world history, at the center, they put Western civilization. Our Tabari, he puts Islamic civilization at the center of world history. Because you see, world history rounds around the prophets, not around society or any other thing. As a result, Tabari takes prophets at the center. If you take it like that, the development is always around the prophets, and it reaches its highest point with Islam. So as a result, that should be at the center of world history. These are very important things, actually. So if we take 0, so we disregard what they are saying about their history, most of it is not correct. You know, as far as the rise of Western civilization is concerned. You know, there is a book, again, world history book written by William Neal, I think, from University of Chicago. The Rise of the West. So you see, the rise of the West. He doesn't say the rise of humanity. So it's always, you know, Eurocentric, their approach. And therefore they come up with this conclusion that, you know, Western civilization began in Greece, Greco-Roman. Because you see, Christianity later on established itself on the Greco-Roman lands, geography, and culture. At the beginning, they rejected that culture very clearly. Even today, you read, you know, histories written by Christian scholars, like Frederick Copleston. I mean, you read, they reject some others also. You know, they call them pagans. What did we call them? Al-Ustaz al-Awwal. We call them like that, right? Ibn Sina al-Farabi, our scholars, Aristotle was called Al-Ustaz al-Awwal. But they call him pagan philosopher. They rejected. But somehow, you know, when their history comes, they accept. The reason is to hide what they owe to Islamic civilization. So therefore, you need to look into history of science books, then you can see. These are disregarded in most cases. And I can recommend you books like George Sarton's Introduction to History of Science, the first volume. You look in his book, you can see what he's saying over there. And Charles Hoskins, the Renaissance of the 12th century, the 12th century Renaissance. Why? Because they take from Arabic into Latin. And that's how sciences began in the West. That is only the beginning, of course. But although they took it from us, they passed us. We remained behind. We couldn't continue with the same, speed. So if we take that 12th century, that means 1200 years that it took for the emergence of first science in Western civilization. I am telling this not to belittle anybody or anything, because Western civilization is definitely a great civilization. Nobody can deny it. We just have to correct some of what they say concerning the history. And that's all. So as a result, we can see in Islamic civilization, sciences emerged with an incredible speed. Even other sciences. This is just fiqh. Physics took only 200 years. Only 200 years.
It's a question, as often some people say, especially from a Western tradition, that Islamic civilization just translated. It was acting as a messenger. It didn't do anything substantive. That it just accumulated the Greek traditions of science and just did the translation, and then they were retranslated back into Western academia. How do we counter those accusations?
This is the early Orientalist idea. Now later on, when new books came out from our libraries, by the way, the manuscripts in our libraries, only about 10% of them are printed. 90% are not even read. They didn't even touch them. So when these books gradually started coming out, they started saying, there are some mistakes concerning that. Now they are acknowledging that, because who invented algebra? Greeks or Muslims? I mean, who invented the decimal system? Who invented algorithm? And I'm saying, whenever in sciences there is an L at the beginning, AL, because that's the Arabic harf ta'rif, it's an Arabic word. Many things are all taken from Arabic. They did not exist in Greek civilization, in any other earlier civilizations. And who invented chemistry? When you read, as I said, if you read history of science, you can see all of these things. Chemistry did not exist as a science before Muslims. And, again, optics, who invented these? Now they are saying that they changed the history of science. They say before the Greek translations, from Greek into Arabic, Muslims were able to develop many of the sciences before the translations. But after the translations, they began to be influenced by the Greek ideas also. So there is definitely a great contribution by the Greek civilization. Especially, this systematization, logic, because logic taken from the Greeks completely. So as a result, we can say that, this is definitely wrong.
What about Indian tradition, like India? And isn't there quite a bit of some Indian aspect of knowledge?
Yes, there was. But again, when you consider Indian civilization, science was not as developed as it developed in Greek civilization. I mean, Greeks were at the height of sciences at that time. So I would say the influence of Greek Hindu civilization is negligible. Not significant at all. Very little. I sometimes give this example, number 0, Muslims, they took it from Indian civilization. But this is not significant at all. We can even say that actually Muslims discovered the number 0, because Indians didn't know what to do with 0. They said there is an empty number, but that's all. But what is it? What is it used for? They couldn't develop a decimal system, algebra, nothing. So a lot of times when I say Muslims discovered 0, the first objection comes from that. They say from Indian. Yes, but that discovery is not so significant. But Al-Khawarizmi it's significant because it led to the explosion of sciences. If you don't have algebra, you wouldn't be able to develop physics. It's impossible, and especially astronomy, all the calculations and so on. Sometimes I say, okay, I'll give you the Roman numerals. Can you do this simple multiplication for me? How can you do it? It would be very difficult, extremely difficult. So I asked this, there is a Dutch professor of history of mathematics. I said, how did they do multiplication? He said they didn't use Roman numerals. They had other methods of, like counting, because it's almost impossible to do multiplication. But with the decimal system, sometimes even you don't have to write it down. Just from your head, you can do the multiplication or other kind of, calculations and so on. So the strength of tradition, leads to the strength of sciences and the civilization and the society. That's why I try to spend a bit more time on this. Each scientific each knowledge tradition has, specific characteristics. Concerning what? Concerning the source of knowledge, the qualities of knowledge, which is considered as a maratib or hierarchy, especially in Islamic civilization, and how it is acquired. This is concerning us in the educational system, right? Because if we know how it is acquired, we can teach much better. So, and then what is the purpose of learning? What is the purpose of knowledge? Why should I learn? These should be very well explained, and how to disseminate knowledge. Okay, yes, I know. In Islamic civilization, again, very much emphasis put on this one. Like in one of the hadith, it is said that someone who knows, has some knowledge, and does not tell others, will be having in the hereafter very big punishment. So this again, so that means it should be disseminated. It should not be sold. So then how to preserve, maintain, I just put little concepts on the right side that makes it clear, I think, what we mean. The idea of tajdid, as you know, in Islamic civilization. And what am I to do with knowledge? Its relation to me and society, and what kind of language should I use, and what is its relation to God. So if a knowledge tradition develops sciences, then it gradually leads to the emergence of a scientific tradition. So that means knowledge tradition is necessary for sciences. If you examine civilizations in the past, you will see that, first knowledge tradition emerges. I will just mention something and leave it, because there is a question that came concerning Indian civilization also. I believe that, some ancient civilizations developed very sophisticated. So that means there can be knowledge tradition, but it depends how sophisticated it is, how much it's developed. If it is sophisticated, it resembles scientific tradition, and it confuses us. It begins to confuse us. So that means there are some past ancient civilizations, they developed sophisticated knowledge tradition, but they don't have sciences. I'll give you 2 examples. You think about it, don't ask me any questions. It will take too much time. My example is Chinese civilization, Indian civilization. They don't have any sciences. They have sophisticated knowledge tradition, and that confuses us. We think they have sciences. Only 3 civilizations have sciences: Greek, Islam, and West. If you examine, I mean, it depends how you define science also. You may define it in a looser sense. You like the Chinese, they explain and so on. I say, fine, if you call it science, I have no objection at all. But if you accept my definition of science, you'll see that you don't have any sciences in your civilization. Anyway, just a side issue. So based on this, we give this definition of a scientific tradition. Just like knowledge tradition, it is the totality of all customs, mores, attitudes, and rituals, beliefs which arise through a regular performance of certain behaviors of members of a group, or rather community of scientists in this case. Not scholars, but scientists. So that is more specific here. They are actively involved in scientific activities that leave a mental conception of those behaviors attributed collectively to that community of scientists. Now, in this definition is general. I think you can apply to any civilization you want to. For instance, if you want to apply to Islamic scientific tradition, you don't say, community of scientists in general, we say Muslim community of scientists. That's all. So that means it reflects Islamic conception behind. Another thing, because this is important for us again in our educational systems, every civilization has its own scientific tradition. There is no universal scientific tradition. But there is one thing today, global scientific tradition. It's not universal. It's global. That means everybody is actively involved. We don't know whether in future this will become universal or not. What I mean by universal is that you look at the definition of a tradition. That means we accept its customs, mores, attitudes, rituals, beliefs, its perspective, looking at things and scientific problems. If we accept it, everyone accepts it throughout the whole world, it becomes universal. But at the moment, we don't accept it. I reject, the perspective of Western science today, as it is practiced. I don't accept. Many others don't accept. Some even Western scholars don't accept, because it has, an atheistic and secular perspective, looking at things, evaluating them, and so on. Their findings. Findings are different. Findings are universal, of course, because what science, if it is correct, in other words. If it is wrong, of course, theories can be universal also, because we know it is theory. We want to work with theories. In science, you don't have theory, you cannot work. So you have to have theories, and the findings also, because findings are independent of us. If something depends on us, it cannot be universal. Because human beings, we are perspectival beings. This is another thing that comes from the epistemology. In our next hour, inshallah, we'll talk about that, the relation of epistemology to education.
So when you say scientific tradition, don't you usually associate with scientific findings? I mean, isn't that to really understand?
Definitely.
I used to look at scientific tradition, I look at findings.
Yeah.
That's what I would go by, not by...
But you see, when you say tradition, in the definition, the customs of the scientists, the way they conduct themselves in science, all those are involved also, not only findings. Findings are part of it also, but not primarily, because perspective is different. If you take, for example, evolutionary theory, with its Western interpretation. Even when we say Western interpretation, it's not even universal. Many Christians don't accept it. So how can we say universal?
Well, evolution is a theory.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not looking at that as a scientific thing. I'm looking at hard science that I can prove it, right? Things that can be proven.
Yeah.
That is universal. No one can argue about it, right?
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, that is universal. Right. But you see, when you said for the evolutionary theory, you don't look at it as scientific, I think they would reject it immediately.
No.
They would say it is scientific.
That's a theory.
Yeah.
It's totally a theory. That's about it.
Right, yeah.
Make it sound as if it is a fact, but the lies they tell us.
Right. But if you look at them, because I know from the universities when we go there, although they call it theory, they say this is finished, you know, it is proved. It's a fact. They don't even look at it as a theory. Only its name is theory. You know, if you know history of science, you will see new discoveries, although they know it is established already, because it is very recently established, they refer to it as theory. Its name continues for some time. But after some time, they drop the theory. They don't mention it anymore. So they think evolution is like that. You know, but obviously we don't think so. There are some things, of course, proved already in evolution. But the most significant thing is whether one species leads to another or other species. This has not been proved yet. And I don't think it can ever be proved. Because, you know, you need a research of millions of years, which is impossible. Even, you know, the life of human history will not be sufficient for that. Right? So it's very difficult. We have to wait for another million years to see if our next generations will change into another species to prove it, okay. But we have to wait for millions of years. So it's very difficult anyway. So then if we continue, we say, how does a scientific tradition emerge? And this is the history, in other words. History of a tradition, okay? History of science, that's what involves here. We said a scientific tradition has a context, that is a society. The context is a civilization here. A society cannot be context of a scientific tradition. Scientific tradition is, you know, it is not like other social traditions. It's very difficult, and it's you know, its cover scope, I should say, very large. It's not like just getting married, marriage tradition or any other culinary tradition, the kitchen, cooking, these things, you know. So as a result, society cannot bear it. So let's give example again from our own civilization. Sciences did not emerge in Mecca. Islam emerged in Mecca, right? Sciences emerged in the civilization, so that means its scope is large. Then you have to, because after 50 years, you know, many people are involved in it, many societies, not one. They are involved. This is the same in Greek civilization also. If you study history of science in Greek civilization, you will see the scope is very large. Not only, you know, of course they say the first scientist, philosopher, Thales, he was in Ionia, and Ionia, as you know, it's in Turkey, on the Aegean coast, a small coastal town. It had a very high level civilization at that time. But until his time, there are so many developments. They had relations with Egypt, Babylonia, Babylonian civilization, and Iranian culture, all those things. So that means the scope is very large. When you look science, you know, coming specifically in a certain area, but it doesn't mean limited to that one. So that should be taken into consideration. Then, of course, the process, right? The scientific process. So I would like to give some, remember, concerning the knowledge tradition, I gave some characteristics that it should have. And scientific traditions usually have, they are supposed to have these at least characteristics. Now, every scientific knowledge has some local characteristics, its own characteristics, namely, others don't have. That belongs to that specific one. Scientific knowledge aims at truth. If not, it won't be a scientific tradition, won't be part of it. It has a specific method. Methodology is extremely important in science. There are some philosophers of science today, they object this, like Feyerabend, this American philosopher. He thought that science doesn't need any method. If you want, you can use magic also in science, invent. He gives some examples from history of science, of course, but I think he makes a very big mistake here. Without methodology, science is impossible. But why is he objecting this? He's objecting because of positivist approach, positivist conception, which is widespread even today throughout the whole world, globe, we should say. Because they said there is only one specific method. Everyone has to accept it. That it cannot change. In Islamic civilization, this is not the case. We say there has to be a method as long as you rationally justify it. Then it's up to you. Then we can see whether you achieve this or not. It depends on success also. Is your method successful or not? If so, good, then I can do it also. So that means it's not universal. It can be individual, but there are universal aspects of methodology. This you cannot avoid. For instance, in physics, you say, I am very intelligent, I don't need experiment, I don't need laboratory, I'll just think and then tell you how atoms are reacting. This is stupid, right? This is not a method. So the experiment, observation, without that it's impossible. This is physics. So that means your method should be suitable for the subject you are studying. So, but it doesn't have to be universal. You can invent a method for yourself if you want to. You know, let's see, Kakule, I think, this French chemist, I believe, was working on finding for the first time. They didn't know the chemical formula of benzene. He worked many years. He couldn't. Many people were working, of course, but he's the one that found it. How did he find? Of course, he was doing research in the laboratory, experiments, chemical reactions, all those things, you know, and to find out. And one day, because his mind was constantly concerned with that, he was sleeping. In his dream, he saw a snake turned around and trying to swallow itself from the tail. When he woke up, he said, I discovered the formula. Because he was wrongly arranging the atoms, because atoms should go like a snake, you know, turning around and going backwards. He did, and he published it, it worked. You see, he saw this in dream, but he didn't say, okay, from now on, I'm going to develop dreams as a scientific method. You see, this is not the case. Of course, they don't have, if it was Al-Ghazali, for example, or Fakhruddin Razi, one of our scholars, he'd say, Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he granted me, he blessed me with this, with the dream, I found it, as a reward for my work. Because that's what Al-Ghazali says, you know, many scientific theories are discovered as a reward, because they spent so much time, and ilham, right, inspiration came, they discovered it. But this you cannot establish as a method. It's not scientific method, you know. It's just an occurrence, it's just blessing, that's all. They didn't try to develop it. This is where he makes a mistake, you know, Feyerabend. Anyway, scientific knowledge is critical. You know, that means you have to criticize. It's cumulative. Positivists don't accept this again. Okay, but in our tradition, we accept it. Knowledge has a scientific aim, not wealth. Most scholars are not, you know, you can see in the life of many scientists, West, East doesn't make any difference. Both in Islam and, you know, in Western tradition, even a famous story about Thales. They said, you know, you are so intelligent, very great. Look, you are a poor person, you know, what kind of, you don't even have a good house or anything. He said, if I want, I can have it. You are after money, I am not. They didn't believe in him. So what he did, he started working on, you know, weather changes, and he calculated that. He discovered that, you know, at 1 year it will be, you know, drought, and they won't be able to have, you know, olives, because, you know, aging cost, It's all the most olives probably in the world, right? They, especially at that time. So very cheap. He collected olives, turning into olive oil. When they had the drought at that year, of course, the olive oil price went very high. And he said, okay, now come, I have a lot of olive oils. When he sold, he became very rich. But he didn't want the money, he just distributed. He said, if I want, I can become rich like this. I'm not after money, I'm after knowledge. We can give many examples for this. The conditions for science, Al-Juwayni says, you know, zeka'un wa hirsun wa iftiqarun. Okay? Wa ghurba. These are important. Zeka, intelligence is required for science. Okay? Hirs, you know, very enthusiasm for learning. This is required. Iftiqar, poor. You have to be poor, not rich, to run after knowledge. Faqr, required. Okay, ghurba, travel, right? Leave your home, your family, your loved ones. You have to leave and run after knowledge, because talabul ilm is very famous in Islamic civilization. You can see one scholar, Ibn Arabi from Spain. Look, he died in Damascus, left his family all around. You know, all scholars. It's like in the West also the same. So as a result, the aim is knowledge. That is the greatest reward. When I was doing my PhD at the University of Chicago, one of our professors in economics, he won the Nobel Prize, and many companies ran after him, and he said, we'll pay you. At that time, you know, the money was very high. They said, we'll pay you $300,000 salary, please come and be advisor in our company. His salary at the University of Chicago was $70,000. He didn't leave. He said, thank you, I like science, you know, no scientific activity. He didn't go. So you can give many examples for this, you know, like that. So scientific knowledge is virtue. That's why they don't leave. So this is very well expressed even by Socrates at his time. And scientific knowledge has a community of scholars. In our tradition, this is called ulama, right? The tradition. And they perceive knowledge as good in itself. Khayrun mahdun, right? Summum bonum in Latin also. They use this word for that. Knowledge is theoretical. Scientific knowledge is primarily theoretical, theory. When it is proved, you know, discovered, they leave it outside, because it is known already. Why should they study? Unless it is related to something that they are trying to discover. So we teach it to the new scientists. We train them in that, and then they learn it. Otherwise, it's not studied anymore in science. Today, nobody is studying, you know, the solar system, whether the sun is turning around or the earth is revolving around, whichever. They study things that they don't know about it. But for these things, you know, at the time of Ibn Sina, I mean, can you imagine? In the 11th century, in the year 1050, Ibn Sina didn't know. Today in elementary school, if you ask you know, a student about the solar system, he knows much more and better and more correct than Ibn Sina. Greatest philosopher, you know, very intelligent. Ibn Sina was genius. He was a genius, definitely. Even Aristotle, the same thing. I mean, even Aristotle was a genius also. You know, very simple knowledge. You see, they don't know. So it is mainly theoretical. And then now this final one is bringing an explanation for the first one. Knowledge has no borders, which means it has universal aspects also that we should consider. So it has local, universal aspects. All of these should be taken into consideration. Now, what are the factors that lead for the emergence of sciences? This is important for us. I have to see how much time we have left, so I go according to that. About 20 more minutes, I suppose. Very good. when we come to the history part, I will pass very fast because I'm probably many of these things you know anyway. Even if you don't, history is very easy. You can just get a history of science book. You can read it. Today, probably they have, I know, published even in English. There are primarily two factors in a civilization that lead to the emergence of, sciences. The first one, I call them nucleus contextual causes. These are necessary. And the other one, auxiliary contextual causes. That means they help the first ones to improve the situation, and complementary. What are the nucleus contextual causes? Moral struggle, intellectual struggle. When I say this, I drove this by studying Islamic civilization. After I studied, I came up with certain specific things. For example, moral struggle for us means the spread of Islam, religion. That is religious struggle for us. But I cannot apply it to other civilizations if I say religion, because they have different things maybe. So as a result, I generalize it. Morality is general, universal for all humans. So as a result, I call it moral struggle. Then intellectual struggle is also universal. Because, every society, they have group of people, and this group, they struggle amongst each other. In order to convince and to attract more people to your side, you need to explain your ideas rationally. That's what I call intellectual struggle. I mean, just consider the rise of Islam, the things, the events. Try to imagine in your mind, you can get, answers for these things, I think. The main explanations. So Islam came, revelation, when people, those who believed in this, because Islam said, okay, now you have to teach others. When it started teaching, there was a reaction. I mean, it's not easy, you are changing your religion. And they used to say, this is our forefathers' religion, how can we leave this? For centuries, we have inherited, and the big struggle started. And in order to convince them, you have to explain, right? So intellectual struggle, that means teaching of Islam, in other words, with the guidance of revelation. You see, because there was divine guidance, the speed was very fast. That is why. And of course, there is the Prophet ﷺ, he was taught also by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is clearly expressed in the Quran also, that the verse says, neither you nor your forefathers knew these things. These are the knowledge of the ghaib that we are sending to you. So, and now you are supposed to teach others also. So this is the intellect. So that means in their mind, gradually, some ideas are developing. Their worldview changes completely. And it turns into, from the jahiliyyah, that is the Quranic term. We didn't call this. The Quran calls it jahiliyyah, the previous knowledge. All the previous knowledge before Islam is ignorance. Ignorance in the sense that they don't know the reality behind the things. Otherwise, they know this world very well. They know the life of this world very well. They have a lot of knowledge about that. But that knowledge loses its character because it loses the main point of reference. So as a result, it was called jahiliyyah, from jahiliyyah worldview passing to the Islamic worldview. So that means the individuals are not the same anymore. If I am not the same, that means I need some changes in my family, starting from my family and other families and so on. This leads to change in the society or social mobility. Then you have to teach educational system, right? In Medina that was established, and the political system. Immediately the Prophet ﷺ, what did he do? Medina Constitution. He drew the chart among the Muslims and all other participants. They said, okay, we follow these regulations. We cannot go, just haphazardly. But these regulations should be written. Before it was not written. It was based on customs, and that's all. But custom you can change, you can oppose. Anyone can oppose. Said, no, I don't accept that custom anymore. Because they are different. There are Jews, very few Christians, but the mushrikun, and the Muslims, different communities. So this political, then legal, okay, if somebody does something wrong, there are rules and regulations now. The punishment, the system that you cannot go and punish on your own, or your family cannot do that. There should be a system, and that system should be following certain rules and regulations, and they are all written down also. And then, of course, the economic. And the other day I was just reading, there is a Turkish professor, history of Islamic economic thought. He says that our Prophet usually would inspect the markets very regularly to see how it's going on, and the rules, what are, if they are practicing something wrong, and so on. So based on this, you see, I give just here how this takes place. Remember I said there is this struggle within the society. The struggle is primarily between two groups, and these groups are very small actually. That means, in other words, Muslims, morally sensitive, mushrikun, morally insensitive. Because many things they thought it was moral, because they think if you are rich, you have the rights for everything. But Islam said no. If you are right, then you are strong. You are not strong because you have money or wealth. So it changed a lot of things morally. So this moral struggle, that's why I call it morally insensitive. But these groups were very small. They are not very big. The big group was in between, the general public. So each one, they try to attract people to their side. So that is the struggle. Struggle takes over these people in between. More than 20% consisting of these people, those in the middle. But of course, you know the history, how it happened and so on. So I take it like that. Now here I will pass this. The explanation I have given you, if you want, you can copy my PowerPoint from here. I made an animation to show this. So I'll just keep quiet, and then you can just look at the animation. Let's see what you can get out of it. Yeah, this is the process mainly taking place that leads to the emergence of sciences. This, again, in general, if you want to see how this took place, as I said, just consider early Islamic history, how it happened. You can tell, more or less, because I came up with this, after my analysis of Islamic civilization. But I generalized the terms so that we can apply it to other civilizations also. If you want to be specific, all you have to do is just put the specifics of that civilization into this, and it will work. Because I tested this. I applied it to Greek civilization, Chinese, Indian, Western also. And it works. That's why I came up with certain conclusions with other civilizations, which I already mentioned, right? So scientific process, I call this process scientific process. Okay? The historical developments that lead in a civilization to the emergence of sciences is called scientific process. Okay? And this process is governed by an epistemology, human epistemology. We will discuss it, inshallah, in our next class. Okay? And then, this leads to emergence of sciences. Through the accumulation, the scientific tradition emerges in a society. We can explain this, more. One thing, if you noticed in the table that I tried to give you, when knowledge tradition emerges in a society, there is an accumulation of knowledge because of the activities. And then people, those scholars that are involved in this activity, they realize that accumulation in certain areas constitute an area of study, which they can name it specifically. This comes as a result of a classification of knowledge. Say all the areas of study in natural events is related to physics, so they say, okay, let's call this physics and this is physics. So This awareness in the mind of these scholars I call scientific consciousness, because now they become conscious of the fact that each area of study constitutes a specific discipline. As a result, they give a name, and this is the naming stage. Okay? So if we consider this, then we can give this table for the process. At the beginning, there are no sciences, and therefore we cannot call it scientific. We say pre-scientific era. This has primarily 3 stages. The worldview stage in early Islam, stage of knowledge tradition, or stage of problems, when they study discrete problems. It's not scientific. There is no method yet. Okay? Then when they begin to develop methodology and classify knowledge in different classes, it enters into disciplinary, because that means knowledge is put under discipline. And as a result of this, remember, each science is called also a discipline in English, right? Disciplining. Because method disciplines knowledge. When they do that, they begin to name each specific area. That is naming stage, which means when you name it, it becomes a specific science. If you consider, I don't know any of you coming from this background or not, you know, history of science especially, or history of philosophy is the same. In Greek civilization, until the time of Aristotle, this never happened. So therefore, what they call Thales as a scientist, a philosopher, he is neither of them. He's neither a scientist nor a philosopher. You know, he's just a scholar. You know, in early times, he's just studying because he didn't name it physics. You know, he just studied some problems in physics, which we call it physics. Or Aristotle named it physics, actually. He didn't. So that means Aristotle is the founder of physics. And because of this, you read his physics, you will see, he says, this science discipline is concerned with physical problems, nature, concerned with nature. And its name is physika. That is a Greek word, isn't it? And its method is observation and deductive approach, logic, in other words, he's using. And then his theories, he begins to summarize the theories. And then he begins to say which theory is correct, which theory is wrong. So you see, this is exact founder. Nobody did this before Aristotle. Nobody did this before Aristotle in human history, not only in Greek history. If you find someone, let me know. So if we consider this, it seems to me that, you know, in this sense, very specific, very strict, you know, Aristotle is the first human being ever to establish sciences in the true sense. You know, and then Muslims, of course. Islamic. So there are 2 civilizations only that established sciences, Greek and Islam. Western, they took it from them. So Western scientific tradition is just, they transferred science. And they developed. You know, it's a great achievement as far as West is concerned, because they did something more difficult, I believe, because you cannot transfer science. It's very difficult. You have to establish an extremely strong conceptual foundation, then you can transfer. Then you will be successful. Like Muslims had very strong scientific conceptual scheme. As a result, when they transferred from Greek science, they were able to develop it further. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to do it at all. I'll give you another bad example. Today, the Muslim world, we transfer from the West. We can never help, you know, increase science and ever be successful in sciences. It's impossible. So today we are also transferring, Muslim world. Muslims transfer science from the West. They cannot develop it. It's impossible because there is no conceptual foundation. It's lost. We lost our conceptual foundation. As a result, we cannot be successful unless we go to the West and work in their universities. We can do some, you know, something. We can achieve something, like Abdul Salam, and this our Turkish professor in chemistry, Aziz Sancar, and so on. If they remain in Turkey or Pakistan, they would never have those achievements. Impossible. It's because of this conceptual foundation. If it's not there, you cannot transfer science. So all we have to do, we just copy, constantly copying. We cannot do anything else. I will tell you one more thing. You think about it. You know, I won't say very strongly, but take the same thing with Indian and Chinese also, and Japanese also probably. Because you see their technological achievement, you say, "Oh, look how great!" You know. No, that's not the case. Today there is only one civilization that produces science. That is the West. Even if someone does it in Turkey, it belongs to the West, doesn't belong to Turkey. Because we work with Western scientific tradition. We are not using Islamic scientific tradition, or there is no Turkish scientific tradition anyway. So, I mean, if you realize these things, I think then you know what to do in the schools also. So we summarize the developments now very carefully. I will leave this for you to read, you know, very slowly, try to understand. Knowledge that was revealed is called Ilim, which is the religion in Islam. So this is the brief summary of science in Islamic civilization, how they emerged and so on, point by point, without going into details. But the believers are required to study and understand that ilm. And when they did this, it was called fiqh, because understanding in Arabic means fiqh, right? But deeper understanding. And this verse refers to that. Okay, so لِيَتَفَقَّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Of course, din is ilm again. You see? Muslims, they forgot because we don't know our tradition anymore. When we say din, we say religion. But what does that mean? You know, the Quran refers to it as ilm, because it was knowledge was given as religion, and we don't do that. You know, when you say din, we say okay, salat, saum, hajj, zakat, finished. But that's not the case. You see today. So and it is not for the believer. Oh, this is the translation of the verse. As a result, fiqh emerged as the first and comprehensive science in early Islam. But as the Quran and Hadith are primary sources of the science of fiqh as ilm, out of fiqh, tafsir, and then Hadith emerged as a science. So this is the process, okay? First ilm, then fiqh, then tafsir, Hadith, and continue kalam. So kalam means philosophy, okay? In Islamic tradition, it is abstract fiqh actually. Abstract fiqh. Okay, and it is the foundation of fiqh, in fact. Okay, so this summary of developments again this way. First sciences that emerged in Islam are concerned with religious knowledge. First, these sciences emerged, the sciences that emerged with religious knowledge. It's impossible for any other. Islamic civilization will not start with physics. It's impossible because our worldview is not based on nature. It's based on Islam, religion. If you depart from religion, you cannot be successful at all. It's impossible. If a Muslim leaves Islam, he won't be successful at all in sciences. He will be successful if he turns into Western, you know, Christian and so on, secular today's. But then he changes his mind, his perspective, everything's changed completely. So this is another reason, you know, for the Muslim world, for their failure, you know. If they leave religion, they cannot develop. It's impossible, because then they start. There is a famous, you know, saying in Turkish. Probably you also have it. You say, he left his way of walking, and he couldn't learn the new way, and he forgot how to walk. So it is something like that. You see, because our worldview is based on religion, on Islam. If you don't develop, so this at the end, next hour, I will give you the red table educational system, how it should be established based on this one. So as a result, the issues concerned with law, society, social and human issues emerged. The scholars dealt with these issues in fiqh and kalam. So we can say after the religious sciences, social sciences emerged. social and human sciences. But at that time, they didn't call it like that. They didn't have a name for that. So those issues are studied in fiqh and kalam, in these two disciplines. In the third stage, physical, sciences emerged. This is the arrangement, because our worldview works like that. If this is the case, that means education in Islamic civilization should start with religion. Very well established. Elementary school teaches only religion, nothing else. No need for mathematics or other sciences. Example, Ibn Sina, one of the greatest scientists and scholars and philosophers. Look, he tells his autobiography. He had extremely strong religious studies. He memorized the Quran. He became Hafiz, he says, when he was 10 years old. And then he started studying the religious sciences, Adab min al-Kutub, in Arabic. When he says that, we understand what that means. Some people will say, oh, look, literature books. That's not the case. He didn't read stories. He was a genius, of course, because he was, in the education, he was working very fast. His father realized this. He hired special teachers to teach him. That is why he was very successful also. And he says a teacher for him would last only 3 months. After that, he would run away, because Ibn Sina passed his teacher in that specific science. He says this in his autobiography. If you have time, it's translated into English. You can read The Life of Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, in English they call like that. You research, you can find this as a PDF also. So that means then in elementary school, only religion, basic worldview, Islam, Quran, ethics, basic fiqh and so on, but in a meaningful way, of course, and that is relevant for our time also. You cannot say, okay, Ibn Sina was successful, let me teach what Ibn Sina was taught. You cannot say that. So as a result...
Professor, can I ask a question? I just want to go back a little bit to what you said before to make sure that it's clarified. You were saying that for any society or civilization to progress, they can't do it by adopting the science of another civilization. They have to go to their base and establish it from that. Can you just explain that a bit more?
Okay. Science in every civilization is based on some important doctrinal concepts. If you don't establish those concepts, clarify in your mind, you will not be able to, progress in those sciences. What are these concepts? Number one, knowledge. What is knowledge? Remember, knowledge tradition, I already gave the characteristics. What is its relation to me? Why should I study knowledge? How is it important? How is it related to the society? So it's a doctrine. The doctrine of knowledge, Ilm in other words, should be understood very well. And the second thing, of course, fiqh. How do we understand? How should we approach knowledge? How should my understanding continue in order to understand that knowledge? What kind of method I need? So the methodology. And that is why when you look in Islamic civilization, ilm usul was developed very fast in very early times, and then the concept of truth, haqq, what is it? Why should I run after haqq, truth? What is its relation to me? How should I find it? What is its significance? What is its purpose? And then science itself. What is science? Right? What is scientific methodology? What is theory? As you know, in the early times, they started arguing about what is ra'i, nadar, why ray should be accepted, why not accepted, what is the significance of text, and the text-ra'i relationships, and so on. So these are the basic concepts. So these basic concepts make up a foundation. And if the mind is well established on that foundation, when you begin to learn about sciences, then you know their relationship with the basic concepts. And then the person becomes more successful. So that is why, it is important. And these basic foundations are established in elementary school. Elementary education becomes, in that case, extremely important. Number one, it's very difficult. Why? Because, you know, at that stage, you have to simplify the knowledge so that the students can understand. Because, you know, if you start teaching at a very high level, they won't understand anything. It becomes irrelevant for them. So how to relate them, how to, that's why Muslim scholars in the past, they developed stories, right? Very good stories. Telling them, you know, in the story there is the lesson. They get the idea from that story. And then they can develop. If you ask them, especially this critical attitude is extremely important. When you tell the story, you ask the student, what do you understand from the story? Do you get a lesson from it? If you do, what kind of lesson do you get from it? And then other student, and then compare their ideas and so on. This way they try to develop it. So this simplicity is also extremely important. It should be simple enough for them to understand. Otherwise, they will be bored. They won't understand anything. But these stories make it interesting also, because, you know, when it attracts the attention. You know, especially like Maulana's Masnawi is full of such stories. In the past, there were many books like that. For those centuries, of course. They had advantage. We are extremely disadvantaged today, because you know, when they start going to school, there are so many things that attract their attention: telephones, social media, television, cinema, plays, football, and you can see they put Ronaldo on their back, you know, and age 5 he says, I am Ronaldo, and things like that. Role models became extremely bad. This makes it extremely disadvantaged today, because they watch on the TV, you know, the soccer games and so on, the football, they go, and then that's it. You know, it becomes extremely difficult to attract their attention to the realities. At that time, they didn't have such things. It was easier. They had advantage. The whole society, in other words, is geared towards teaching the foundation. But today, unfortunately, it's not like that. So it makes it extremely difficult. So that's why we have to invent things to attract their attention. So this is what I tried to say this, and then the scientific era comes at the you know, final stage, because then they develop the method and so on, and they start naming each of the sciences. I give this on a table. I have the table to show this process also. That makes it easy. You know, one by one I list. In case of Islamic civilization, you can see the contextual causes which I mentioned. Struggle for Islam, emergence of Islamic knowledge tradition first, stage of emergence of Islamic worldview, stage of problems, then the emergence of knowledge tradition, and then the disciplinary stage. The dates I give you are, you know, approximate. They are approximate. They are not good. The dates. We need more study actually to come up with these dates. And then the stage of naming. That means all the sciences, because, you know, I give, for example, general description, which is not good. You have to take each science separately. Take history of fiqh, for example. If you take that, all days everything will change here. The process, you know, the worldview stages, those will not change. The dates will change, because fiqh emerged very early, you know, and then tafsir hadith, they emerged very early. But today, you know, our approach to science in Islamic civilization is holistic, meaning our studies, if it has a method, you know, and subject matter, and understanding, accumulation of knowledge in tafsir studies, we call it tafsir science. But in the West, they wouldn't call it science, especially today, you know, in this positivistic understanding. They said this is not, it's just, you know, no, you believe. It's belief, you know, it's not it's personal, subjective. This is not science. But we don't take it like that. Our approach is very holistic. If it has all these characteristics, it is science. And even hadith, they will never call it science. Ulumul hadith, as in Islam, we call it like that. So our approach is different. This shows again, scientific traditions are local, right? If they don't accept, we don't reject them. We say, okay, fine, because your definition is different. So as a result, this is the table, and then I just show you some achievements by Muslim scientists in physical sciences, like Zakaria al-Razi, Ali ibn Rabban al-Tabari, the famous. These people influenced the West greatly. All these sciences are taken from the Muslims in the West. When they took these, they translated the Arabic. Western historians of science, they say that when they read Galen, Aristotle, Hippocrates, they wouldn't be able to understand. They couldn't understand it. So they had to read the Arabic explanations. You see, from the Arabic translations, when they read that, they understood. Because you see, those are not systematic. Greek science is not very systematic. You read Aristotle's, if you are curious, take Aristotle's theology, you read, see what you understand. His metaphysics, in other words. You will have very hard time, you can't. And you take Al-Farabi, you read, then you can see how you understand very well. Or you take Ibn Sina, you can understand very well. Because Muslims systematized. You take Aristotle's logic, you will have extremely hard time. I mean, you have to read it for days and nights, maybe for years, gradually until you understand it. But you take Al-Farabi, in 1 week you understand what it means, what he's trying to say, or Ibn Sina. You see, because they say, oh, very good, but this is not systematic. They systematized it and made it very easy available. So as a result, Western historians, they say this very clearly. They wouldn't be able to understand Aristotle at all. As a result, they had to read Ibn Rushd, because Ibn Rushd wrote commentary explaining Aristotle. Only then they were able to understand. And then when they understood, they know what metaphysics is and so on and so forth. Finally, in the 17th, 18th century, they said, oh, okay, let's go back to the originals, the Greek originals. Only then later on they started going to the Greek originals. They started studying Greek and so on and so forth. And then when they learned this, they disregarded. They said, oh, we took it from the Greeks, not from Muslims. So after the 18th century, they started saying like that. They disregarded, and the period when they were borrowing from the Muslims, they called those Dark Ages. Okay, they call it, intentionally dark, because otherwise you'll see Muslims. So unfortunately, this is the case. When I talk about those ages, I don't say anything. I quote from them. I just quote from Western historians, and they give quotations directly. Because it's so bad, that if I say, they say, look, he's, subjective. He's just saying about. So as a result, I just quote them directly. Extremely important. I mean, like this Henry George Farmer. He says, he quotes actually from another historian, that he says one of the most deplorable thing concerning Western civilization is the fact that they systematically try to hide. I mean, this is the exact word he's using. Systematically try to hide what they owe to Muslims. Because you see, systematically they try to, and as a result, our great, I don't know if you heard of his name or not, but the whole world knows him, Fuat Sezgin, one of the greatest historians actually of science. And he said that the West is a child of Islam. Mainly he's referring to this, Fuat Sezgin. All of his books are in German. Very few are in English. Now they gradually starting. He wrote, I mean, the whole books that he wrote, they are probably about 1,000 volumes in history of science. No one has achieved so far what he has achieved in history of science.
His museum and his own library by Sofia.
I hope, inshallah, if you have time, you should visit.
Gülhane Park.
Yeah, he passed away 3 years ago, and they, as a result to, tribute for his achievements, they put his grave there also, in his museum, in front of the museum. Fuat Sezgin. The most extensive writings in history of science in Islamic civilization. He wrote all of this. Every time he discovered something, he saw Muslims, discovered it. Muslims developed it. All of these things, he said. And then finally, he said, just 2 years before his death, he said, I cannot express how much they owe, the West owes to Islamic civilization. Just let me say this, you understand, I hope. The West is a child of Islam. He said like that.
Isn't the reason for them systematically hiding it is because at that age they had to colonize the world and they had to obviously prove them being more sophisticated. And I mean, if you look at India and all that, a lot of it was done by putting the locals down and saying we are more superior to you. We come from a different tradition. Isn't that one of the reasons why?
Definitely. Yeah. Anyway, I hope you have time, to read the history of science written even by the Western. I just put these some achievements. All of these are directly transferred from Islam to the West, all through the translations. All of them. They are very well known. They all have Latin names and Arabic names also. And you don't realize. And let me tell you one more thing. 90% of technical terms in sciences in Latin are Arabic. They are not Latin at all. Because Latin was not developed. Roger Bacon, the famous scientist, right, British, he says, if you don't know Arabic, you cannot be a scientist. Don't study. Don't come to us. You have to learn Arabic. Because of this, I mean, can you imagine 90% of the technical terms, not regular terms, I mean technical terms are Arabic in Latin. But you don't even recognize them today. When you look at them, you don't recognize, like the word college. College is, Arabic. Yeah, from Kulliya. Very well known, there are many words, algorithm, many of the things like that. As I say, when there is an AL at the beginning, it is Arabic. It's because of this. And then even today, those Latin technical terms that are Arabic, they went into other Western languages, French, German, English. So I'll tell you something, if you have time you can investigate. There is not a single English word that is scientifically technical term. Not a single one. All technical terms in English are either Arabic, Latin or Greek. Because English is not it has never been a language of science, never. And later on, when it becomes a language of science, then, In Arabic, we borrowed from the Greeks also. Very few from Indian and from Iranian Farsi language. But very few from Greek also. Because Arabic language is, very rich. You can invent. It is suitable for inventing terminology because it's based, on roots. From the roots, you can invent more words. So as a result, they were able to translate. But some words they couldn't find because of Islamic worldview. Like the term uthulugia. Theology, in other words. They couldn't find, so they used the Greek word. And some, like qanun, namus, such words, are also Greek. They.
Alkali, I teach myself.
Yes.
Alkali comes from the Arabic word al-qalawi.
You see? As I said, there is al at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
So it is Arabic, definitely. So this is all. Thank you very much.